Project Sunrise is ultra long haul done properly. But in the meantime, what Qantas have been doing is experimenting with ultra long haul routes flown by their 787 Dreamliners. Now, we'll go into all the detail of this in a moment, but about a year ago, or almost a year ago, Air New Zealand launched their direct flight from Auckland to New York using their Dreamliner. The whole thing ended up being a little bit of a disaster, you could argue, in that they had a lot of trouble with, it's meant to be obviously direct, where they thought they might have to have a stopover, where they had to kind of literally take luggage off the plane, where they had to ask people not to get on there because it weighed too much and essentially couldn't make the journey in the event of bad weather, in the event they'd have to redirect their flight path. That was an absolute palaver. And now Qantas have come in and launched their own, the same route from Auckland, New York, using the same aircraft. However, they cannily are putting a lot less people on it. But anyway, nonetheless, this is the restart of flights from Australia, because it will go, I think, from Sydney to Auckland and then on to New York. Jake, tell us everything we need to know about this.
Yeah, so this is the first time that Qantas has flown to New York since COVID. They used to fly through LAX. They are now going through Auckland. So you fly across to Auckland, you have a stop in Auckland, and then it's like a 16-hour, 15-minute shot straight to New York with no stops in the middle. So Qantas now has 3 of the world's longest flights, Perth to London, Dallas to Melbourne, Auckland to New York. They're using their Dreamliners. It'll go 3 times per week, increasing to 4 from October, more than 1,800 seats per week. This is a bit of a change for Qantas, who, by the way, have come under a little bit of fire from the flight attendants union because they on the Auckland to New York leg, they are using New Zealand-based crews as opposed to Australian crews, and the Flight Attendants Union has accused them of doing this because the New Zealand crews voted to lower their rest requirements. But in a statement, Qantas has said that no, these crews are getting a minimum like 49 hours of rest in New York over 2 nights. So it's got echoes of the whole Finnair thing from a little earlier in the year. But essentially, you can now fly Qantas from Sydney or to New York without having to deal with LAX and all that LAX entails.
One of the interesting things about this, and there will be people listening to what I'm going to say now and that will not necessarily agree with it, is the use of the 787 Dreamliner, which on the one hand it's mostly meant to be a workhorse long-haul airline. That's what it is. It isn't as big as the A380. It doesn't go as far as the upcoming 777X. It's kind of your workhorse international airline. However, it has the ability to do these ultra-long-haul routes, but it can only really do them if it limits the amount of people are in the air. And so the problem that Air New Zealand had is that they launched this route and they said that they did all of the research and they used their algorithms and their computers and whatever it was to work out the kind of a maximum amount of people they could get on this aircraft and still do that route without any trouble. But obviously they had an awful lot of problems. When Air New Zealand launched the route, they were very, I wouldn't say cocky, that's going too far, but Greg Foran, the CEO, there was some quote where he's like, we're wave to Qantas as we take off because they beat them to it by 8 months. It all seemed to go a little bit horribly wrong. They then doubled down and said that despite these issues, they did pick the right aircraft to do the flight. However, they will be receiving some new aircraft in a couple of years, which will fix the issue. So it's a kind of a sorry, not sorry. We got it wrong, but we didn't. But Qantas cannily will not have this problem because they are flying with significantly less people, almost like they knew this was a problem in advance and they didn't fall into the trap.
So what I will say, and I guess I'll put my former Air New Zealand hat on, when Air New Zealand launched the route, they did launch the route knowing that the aircraft wouldn't operate full in the economy cabin. They restricted the number of passengers on board. Did they necessarily get that number of passengers on board correct? Not necessarily, in my own opinion. And I know just prior to me exiting Air New Zealand, they did reevaluate that number and make some changes. What Air New Zealand couldn't predict, though, and it's impossible for any airline to predict this, is winds on the flight, weather on the flight, things like that.
I don't want to pick an argument with you here. particularly as we're very close.
We are very close.
I don't necessarily think you're saying, oh, there's no way they could have known, which is what Air New Zealand was saying. They said we did all the preparation. They say this, but Qantas somehow were able to know. And Qantas have got into this with their standard setup, carrying significantly less passengers.
What Qantas have in their favour is they'd already launched and had experience with Perth London.
Yes, but
so they'd already taken out the teething issues there. They also had, when they first launched A380 flights between Sydney and Dallas, Qantas, pre-COVID, many years ago when the A380 entered service, a lot of people at Qantas said it was the wrong aircraft. It couldn't make it. It was too long, etc. Now, that aircraft in the first 12 months of operation diverted to Fiji numerous times because of weather or fuel issues or something going wrong that Qantas hadn't foreseen or predicted. So Qantas had a bit of knowledge or education behind them.
I do get your point. And I don't want to be very cynical.
Go for it.
What Chris is referring to particularly is they had the Perth to London ultra long haul route, which they've made a massive success of. They didn't really have any of these kind of problems. I do suggest that one of the C-suite executives at Air New Zealand could have bought a ticket on one of those flights and gone and experienced themselves and maybe noted down the amount of passengers on that plane. I don't necessarily think the kind of intelligence that Qantas had, Air New Zealand couldn't have quite easily obtained. The accusation is that they tried their luck a bit too much.
Look, did they try their luck a bit too quick? In my opinion, yes.
Yes.
You will not get an argument out of me on that. Are they doing well on the route? Yes, they are. Will this see some really good competition on the route? Absolutely, most definitely. And that's a win for the passengers. It's a win for our listeners. It's a win for the travelling public. But watch this space because Qantas will have an issue on this route. There will be unfavourable winds. There will be a cyclone somewhere leading into North America that will have Qantas having to divert around winds or cyclones or weather. Jake's putting his finger up. Go for it.
Yeah, just on the a little bit of facts and figures here. The 787-9s that Qantas is using will be carrying 236 passengers. Air New Zealand has a 275-seat configuration, but passenger numbers capped at 180. I will say, by the way, I believe the Air New Zealand flights, the Dreamliners, will be having the Sky Nests eventually. So that's nice.
They will.
But the Qantas has also said, so Alan Joyce says that the plane will have more room and fewer seats than, quote, most of the competitors, and has been designed with long-haul travel in mind. Qantas has also said it's using an advanced cloud-based flight planning system that models flight paths, measuring flight times and winds to determine the optimal route. And as you've noted in the story, Adam, Air New Zealand's problems were often caused by having to lengthen the flight path to avoid bad weather.
I thought this was very interesting, these quotes, because it was the communications that Qantas sent out were written very carefully in the sense that they made no reference to Air New Zealand. They made no reference to all these problems. But they make these kind of these quite pointed quotes, which was quite interesting because they've launched many routes over the last 2 years post-COVID. They've never referred to potential issues you could see before. It was, I would imagine Alan Joyce was very much enjoying this because Greg Coram was very, and again, not cocky, but he did like to rub in the fact they got there first. Now Alan Joyce has, you could argue yet again, had the last laugh.